All right, let's get into this video. It's going to be a fun one. Kriega bundle. Earlier this year, I got a whole lot of excited. I got a whole lot of excited just like a lot of you did, because I heard that Titan Books was going to be putting out a novelization of the 1982 Conan the Barbarian movie, which I think for most of us who are Conanophiles, we pretty much look at that movie as somewhat sacrosanct at this point in time. We're not willing to accept a lot of criticisms or changes to it or really critiques to it. In fact, most of us are actually looking out to the 4K release of this, which I think is coming out in January, with the 4K release of Destroyer. That's going to be fun times. But when this was coming out, I got to tell you, half of me was like, uh-oh, this could be kind of bad, because I had this horrible experience in reading the novelization of the original Black Hole movie. And then I thought, well, this could also be kind of good. And the more and more I read about the people who are working on it, the more and more I went, this actually might not be bad at all. This could be a lot of fun. So I picked it up, and this is what we got here. And today we're going to be going through this. Now, I would normally throw in a spoiler alert here and say, guys, blah, 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 blah. But I'm not going to do that today. And the reason I'm not going to do that today is because, well, if you're watching this video, you already know what happened in Conan the Barbarian. It's just like Titanic. You know what happens at the end of it? The boat sinks, okay? So I'm assuming you know the content. What I'm going to be walking through today, though, is just some of the observations that I had within the novelization and things that I really liked about it, actually. And I think they're things that you're going to like, too, if you go out and pick it up. All right, let's get into the book and actually start talking content. Okay, let's get into the book. Now, there's two real aspects I want to cover here on this video. And one is going to be about the physical aspects of the book. And the second is going to be about the writing, okay? So we'll start with this chapter now. For those of you who don't want to talk about how this book physically looks, you can go ahead and skip on to the next one, right? Let's talk about this thing physically, though, shall we? Beautiful. Honestly, I cannot get over what they produced here. And they've done it exactly what I would want it to be. So for those of you who are of my generation, all of you, I'm assuming that when you were reading your Conan stories in the written form for the first time, you were reading them in books like these. The original Bantam books, or whatever else they were published through. That's what the format was that you guys were picking up out there, just like me. So when you were reading Conan, you were reading them on paperback. Paperback. You weren't reading them in big iron-bound tomes. You weren't reading them on old, crispy pages that you couldn't turn because they'd fall apart when you turned the page. You were reading this. So choosing this to be the vehicle that you distributed this with is a very wise choice, all right? You got a nice matte finish. It feels nice in your hands. It's got just about the same size and poundage of one of the original books. And on top of that, I'm not seeing any crappy cutting of corners with the way this is produced. This thing is beautifully square, beautifully bound, and I even like the fact that they created this sort of marbleized effect on the actual images that makes it look like it's almost an aged tome without actually being there. Like I can run my finger across it. It's perfectly smooth. Nothing the matter with the book. That's just the look they were going for. So physically, I think this was really well done and well chosen by the production team as to what they were doing to put it on the market. Now, that's one. And this is something they got going for them, okay? Let's talk about the writing now, because that's really the only aspect of this that we need to get into. Now, I'm not going to get into the story, okay? We don't need to get into the story. This is a novelization of the movie, all right? The writing is going to match the movie. Now, I know there are a lot of people out there all over the Reddit, and they're over here making the very positive comments about this writing team. And then I see other people making the very negative comments about this writing team because it's not Robert E. Howard. And I know Robert E. Howard is sacrosanct, but he's dead, okay? When you're looking at these things, you've got to look at who's writing what, when, and how. This is a new writing team for the character. Well, not really new, but it's not the Robert E. Howard writing team, right? So obviously there are going to be detractors and there are going to be proponents of this. I'm not going to get into it. What I'm going to tell you is they know the character. And honestly, as far as the movie goes, they followed that story perfectly. Now granted, when you're writing a novelization, you have the ability to do things. You can make little side jaunts. And let's talk about those side jaunts from here. We're almost talking about side quests here, okay? When you're writing one of these, you're saying, okay, listen, Conan has to go from here, where the movie came up with its own particular take on his origin, and it's got to go to here, where basically he's killed Thulsa Doom and everything's fine, and he goes riding off into the sunset. We know we got to get between these 2 points, but we can do all sorts of things in the middle. Now you have choices. You can do things that are very serious, or you can do things that are very light, and you can do things that actually add to the character. You do things that don't add to the character. So for example, if they decided to throw in a side quest of Conan going into a castle full of level draining ghosts along the way, It's fairly material. Also would have absolutely nothing to do with Conan, and you probably don't want to do that. If you wanted to add in a side quest where Conan was going to be a celebrity judge in a swimsuit contest for Elven Maiden, pretty much an impossible side quest, but you could throw that in there. They didn't do that. What they did was they threw in some differences though. And it's funny because when I grabbed this, because I actually own a copy of this, and because I'm practicing new and different things, and I can do really whatever I want in my old age, I actually personalized this and made this my own. I actually figured out how to add pages to the book. And I've actually made my own little copy here where I've thrown in my own pages, where I've thrown in my notes of what I've seen here, there, and everywhere. And I've said, oh, this is kind of cool, and this kind of cool. And it's funny, one chapter I actually gave a title to. Where was my title? Oh, yes. The Assassination of the Hero Ostrich by the Cowardly Jarl, which I find quite funny. I added that in because it makes me sort of chuckle. But they did add in some differences here. And the differences they added in were fairly minor, but were enough to add to the character overall. The movie, because it's somewhat limited in what it can do for you, can't really give you the full Conan mythos. You don't really get a sense of all the depth that Robert E. Howard wrote into Conan, because really, the movie portrays a very early in the career sort of Conan. This isn't the Conan that's out there just about to become the king. This isn't the Conan that's out there that's traveled the entire earth. This is a somewhat limited Conan, right? So he doesn't have a lot of depth. So this Conan, fairly shallow depth Conan, okay? Not deep depth Conan. We're not talking about still waters here with miles underneath it of content. We're talking about, still waters here with about 4 inches of content underneath it. He's working on it. And he got all the right chops to get there, but he ain't there. So what the writing team did here was they added more to it. And I can tell you, there are a couple very interesting differences in this that I want you to pay attention to when you're reading this, okay? Because I gotta tell you, these things jumped out at me. They made me stick a little page in here and make a note because quite frankly, I thought, wow, that was really well done. And I'm gonna outline 3 for you here, okay? 3, just 3. The first one was really the origin. The movie Conan the Barbarian, it had a nice voiceover. It had the whole physical montage at the beginning of it, but the actual origin of Conan and what's going on in his head, you don't get to see. You don't really get a sense of who Conan is. You don't get a sense of what he's thinking about when he's on that wheel for years and years and years. Basically learning only how to walk in a circle, which is why I'm amazed he can walk in a straight line now. I mean, if you're only walking, who knows? Anyways, years of doing this. So they really delved into that. They spent a good amount of time up front really digging into what's Conan thinking? What's going on in his head? Why is he here? And the good part about it is they write it in almost a reflective way, because this is the story that's being related to a scribe in Conan's aged years, where he's looking back on it. And there are a few vignettes where you have Conan's italicized language as an old man saying, I really do regret that, because if I did this differently, just think of all the things that it would have helped me with later in life. That was nice. That was really, really nice, because it gives you a sense of, well, why is Conan doing all of this? Why wouldn't he just say, well, you know what? I've escaped from the wheel. I'm just going to head back to Samaria. You don't know. You really don't. But you get a sense of it now because the novel is building up on it. That was a nice one. Second one, and this is kind of a key one. This is one of those pet peeve points for me, always when I watch the movie, was Conan's running along because he's gotten himself out of the pit fighting because the guy released him. And he's doing his thing, run, and wolves are after him. And he goes down into this hole in the ground, and he finds this giant skeleton, and he grabs a cave, and he goes Crom, and he thinks it's Crom. It's not Crom, by the way. And he thinks it's Crom. It's like, oh, Crom. And he gets the cave, and he gets the sword, and he goes out because he's like, ooh, sword, and ooh, there are wolves outside. I should go massacre those. And he goes and massacres them. Why is this so important? Couldn't he have just picked up a sword anywhere? Why did they make this big deal about Conan going into this hole in the ground, finding a giant skeleton, and getting the sword? Never really understood that in the movie. This actually walks through it, and it gives you a whole level of mythos that goes with that. It honestly does. It gives you, well, this is the sword. This is just a little snippet. Because you remember how I've said previously many, many times on this channel that Robert E. Howard was a genius at throwing onions in his stories, where you would sit here and you'd peel off the layers. And every time you peeled off the layer, there was something else underneath it. You go, what is that doodle? Well, you never knew. Because, well, again, Robert E. Howard's dead. We can't ask him. These guys are still alive. But they threw in these things, this little onion. You're like, oh, that's kind of neat. That's a nice piece of mythos that goes with that sword story. Kind of cool. I wish I could find out more, but I'm going to allude back to that in a minute. A third thing they did in here, though, which doesn't actually have to do with the sword, because bear in mind, you've now developed Conan as the character. You've now developed Conan and his sword, because again, bear in mind, you also have his father's sword at the beginning, which we all know has its own mythos in the story. We don't need to get into it. But now you're going to dump more time into the surrounding characters. This is really where the money is in this book. And this is where I think they really just nailed it. King Osric. You watch the movie and you're like, okay, it's an old guy with a beard that comes out and basically pours jewels at them and says, go rescue my daughter. Okay, it's a fairly one-dimensional quest. Why are we doing this? Why would we choose to continue this? Oh yeah, Thulsa Doom's there. That's great. I'm going to go kill Thulsa Doom. No problem. You know, the snakeheads that face like this with a sword and the son of the moon. Yeah, all that sort of stuff. I get it. But why? Why wouldn't Osric just say to himself, hey, you know what? How about I just assassinate my own daughter and end this whole thing? You know, this is the Hyborian Age. These people are cruel. What's stopping him from doing that? Granted, there's some dialogue in the movie, but really, there's a lot of alternatives here that you don't really get a sense of. Osric as a character, they actually take the time to develop. You actually get a little more story with him. So much so that they actually involve later, which was that chapter that I named myself, the assassination of Osric. Osric doesn't make it in this thing. He's gone. Now, why is he gone? You'll find out. Read the story, because they developed that. Another character they had to build up, which is a huge one here, which quite frankly we didn't really get a sense of in the movie. Who the hell is the cinematic version of Thulsa Doom? Anyone? He's a guy that can turn himself into a snake and disappear in a hole when he's in his, love cavern or whatever it is. And quite frankly, but there's a threat. Yeah, that's great. And he can control people, but he turns into a snake? Who is this guy? This isn't the Thulsa Doom that I know from my Cull comics. What's he all about? The book gives it to you. The book really does. And there's a twist at the end. And quite frankly and I already gave you the hint. I gave you the hint. There's a word in here and you're going to know it. When you get to that last chapter, you're going to be like, oh, it's huge, okay? You finally get a sense of at least what Thulsa Doom is. That's important. So those two little things for me, as far as character development, does that tick that final box. And that to me was the third major key in this book, this novelization, that really made this sit home to me. You have the development of the character itself. You have these interesting little side vignettes into it that aren't major side quests that make no sense. There's small ones that build into it and add a little bit of the mysticism to it. And then at the end, you've got the development of these major characters, these major players in this movie that always was sort of glossed over in the film version. To me, what it did was it took what was a great movie to begin with, and it's now made it a great story. This novelization has done exactly that. It's taken my appreciation for Conan the Barbarian back in 1982, which is a great film, don't get me wrong, but it's taken it to a next level, because I can now take the mythos in this, keep it in the back of my head, watch the movie and go, that's who that guy is. I got you. I see what you're doing there. Honestly, reading this makes you appreciate that more. All right, let's wrap this bad boy up with some final thoughts on what I think is going to happen next year, okay? So, as I mentioned the majority of this, and I think I alluded to it fairly well, this was a really well-done novelization. It was a well-done book. It was well-done standalone work, and it's a well-done addition to the original Conan the Barbarian movie. Honestly, I think it makes that movie experience now better if you have this under your belt. It really does add that level of depth and layers that you need to understand what honestly is a surface review of Conan when you look at it in retrospect. It was really well done. Let's just leave it at that. What do I think is going to happen next, though? This is an interesting aspect. Remember that part where I was talking about the sword? Remember when I said, gee, I wonder where that is? Remember I talked to the whole point of onions in a story and it's sort of the layers that make you go, well, what is that doodle right down there? You want to really dig down into it, but you don't really get a sense of what it is. Robert E. Howard, as I mentioned, was a genius at this. His stories had layers on layers in them, and this is why we're drawn to his tales. It's not because, all the surface violence and all the excitement. Don't get me wrong. They hold you there, but it's the layers underneath that really make you appreciate his depth as a writer. And this is what I'm seeing in this book. And I think it was done intentionally. And here's my prediction going forward, my hope going forward. This book left me with a sense that it was written in such a way that I could expect a sequel. Granted, this is a different story for Conan. This is a different world for Conan. The origin of this Conan is different. We know he becomes a king. That's alluded to clearly in the story. But how he gets there seems to be different. How his whole legend, his mythos, his story starts starts from a different place and different characters are involved. That's really kind of interesting. And honestly, it says to me, well, now that you've written that, couldn't you just continue that? I get a real sense when I read this that the authors have left this open to the point where they could write a sequel if necessary. And if it's not them, somebody else could write a sequel building on this mythos. That sword story, for example, was fairly material. The ending where you have Conan leaving the kingdom where he was offered a kingship, and Subutai goes in one direction, he goes somewhere else. And they're very clear as to where they're going for a reason. Those details are there for a reason. The development of those additional characters in the background that I mentioned that were so important, some of them actually made it out of this. And some of them, I think, should actually come back in another story. Am I hopeful that I'm going to see an actual continuation of this? As much as it seems strange for the fact that this was a novelization to say, yes, I am hopeful. I would very much like that. Please, Titan Books, if you're paying attention, start typing. Well, everybody, that's the video for today. I hope you enjoyed this one. Honestly, I had a lot of fun with this book. Reading this was a real enjoyment for me. And as you guys know, and I've mentioned this many times before, I'm an incredibly slow reader. And having the time to read this was really precious to me. This added to a life experience that I hold dear, which is watching that movie. And it's actually made it better. And I encourage any of you who have the same interests and likes that I do to go out and pick this up. Actually take the time, read this, and set it aside. Do I think that the rest of you need to add your own little pages into it? Probably not. I mean, I might have gone a little over the top on that one, but you know what? I enjoyed it one way or another. Everybody, I hope you enjoyed this one. We'll see you in the next video. Alright, it's time for our end of the video Easter egg. Now, as you guys know who have watched my channel regularly, I put these in at the end of videos from time to time when I think it's important to actually communicate a message. And sometimes I just put them in for fun, because every once in a while I'll be doing something interesting. This one is going out specifically to you, Titan Comics, so I hope you're listening to this. Now, I want to say two things right off the bat. First of all, thank you. You're doing a fantastic job taking a character that I was really worried was going to become completely irrelevant and disappear. And you're giving that character longevity, and you're giving that character depth that I haven't seen put into this IP for quite some time. And as a Conanophile and a Robert E. Howard fan, that's phenomenally rewarding. So 2 points to you for that. Second thing that I'm noticing from your behavior is that you're actually showing me you're listening to your fan base. Now, I don't know what corporate policy you have in place, and honestly, I'm not in comics. This is not my industry. In fact, if most of you tried to guess what my primary day job was, you'd be somewhat shocked, because I know most people, when they look at me, are going, seriously? You? Yeah, I know. It's shocking, but trust me, I do it. But that's not the point here. I don't know enough about this industry, but I do know that you guys are listening. I mean, you watched my videos. I'm just Tennessee Fats. I'm just a guy over here reading Conan that's a huge fan that every once in a while throws out a comment and at a video to support the actual IP. And you've been listening to me. I don't see that in other companies. In fact, I see that being ignored in other companies. When people come up with comments, it's just like, oh, I just don't care about this because we're just going to continue doing whatever we want. So in comics, that's very refreshing. But what I wanted to do is give you guys feedback about what I've run into and what I've been told by third parties, because really you should be aware of this. The bottom line is the content that you're producing is genius. Like, I'll tell you, I've got I've got all the issues thus far. I think I pretty much have every single cover thus far too. And I mean, my last shipment that came in was issue number 4. And I'm particularly happy about this. But I don't know if you know this, but I'm actually working on a project where I'm comparing distribution models of comics that are getting to me either through US distribution channels or through Canadian distribution channels, because I'm in Canada. And I've always wondered, because when I'm picking up books in a store, I always find, why is this a reader copy if it's brand new? Shouldn't I be buying a brand new copy and making it a reader copy? So this is why I went down this road and I've been doing this project. So I've been dealing with a US company as well as a Canadian company for my pull list lately. And this is an interesting one. And what I've got are 2 issues here that I wanted to bring to your attention. Now, there's nothing in particular the matter with these issues. I tell you, I have these, and these are my duplicate copies that came up from the States. I already own copies of these that I picked up at my local comic shop here in Canada. But when these came in, they had material physical defects to them. And when I reached out to the retailer, I said, guys, I'm noticing that these 2 issues, and I sent them photos, seem to have a problem. And I don't know if this is something that can be corrected. Can we get better copies? Is there any way I can get copies in that have matched what I've seen thus far? Because thus far, this comic shop has been doing stellar work. And I'll talk more about them later when I make a video specifically about them, when I'm doing the final wrap-up on this project I'm working on. But one of the things they came back to me with, and I actually found very shocking, and I thought, well, I wonder if Titan is aware of this. And I thought, I better throw an egg in here so you guys can actually hear this. When I asked, they said, well, actually, Tennessee, the issue that we're running into right now, with particular with this publisher, is that a lot of the books that we're getting right now seem to be damaged through our distribution model. And they seem to be coming in damaged. And we've gone back to our distributor saying, well, we could either return everything and thus have no comics and ask for better, or we could just throw out the bad copies and give out the best we've got. And they've chosen to go that route. And when they were telling me this, they said, we've also checked with our distributor, and our distributor, unfortunately, is going the exact same route we're going, where they're just delivering the best of the best. And it seems to be particular to this publisher. Now, I don't know if that's true. I honestly, given everything that I've heard from this comic shop thus far, I would assume it's true because they've never lied to me yet. And everything has been good. So I'm wondering if something is going on that you guys might not be aware of after the day these comics leave your shops, after they leave production. Is something happening there that's actually hurting your comics? And I bring this to your attention because, quite frankly, I'm a Cananophile. I love this content. And the fact that you're adding the longevity and the depth to the IP that I mentioned earlier is very important to me. And I would hate to see this potentially be stymied by collectors out there who might be saying, well, I want to have the best of the best copies that I would normally get through a regular comic distribution model that I'm not getting. I don't know if there's something you can do about it. I don't know if you can look into it. But I just wanted to let you know. Again, I do want to throw at this though. You guys are doing fantastic work. Keep it up. Because quite frankly, the stuff you're producing, damn, well done.